WJR. Here's WJR's Kevin Deitz.
White House staffers are reportedly dropping a key piece of President Biden's climate agenda, a plan to replace coal and gas-fired power plants with renewable energy. This after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia told the administration he was opposed to it. Coal is a dominant industry in Manchin's home state of West Virginia. The president needs the support of all 50 Democratic senators in order to pass the measure through a process known as reconciliation. The program in question, that's the $150 billion Clean Electricity Performance Program, which would financially reward utilities that transition to renewable energy and would penalize those who do not. Experts say that program could sharply reduce greenhouse gas pollution tied to electricity generation, which today accounts for about a quarter of U.S. emissions. Joe Manchin, a conservative West Virginia Democrat, has indicated to the White House that he opposes the key climate measure in Biden's multi-million-dollar climate and social programs package. Joining us now to talk about all this is Dave Dulio, director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Political Science, professor at Oakland University. Good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning, Kevin. I'm well. How are you?
Good. Joe Manchin seems to be running the country. I don't know. He's got a lot of power for a Democrat from West Virginia.
He sure does. It's just another example of life in Washington in a time of very thin majorities in the U.S. Senate.
It really is interesting to watch it play out, and they have the votes if all the Democrats could agree, but they really don't. The progressive Democrats feel very different than conservative or moderate Democrats, especially when it comes to this large spending package.
Well, and that's really the key point: is that Democrats are going to point at Republicans for opposing President Biden's agenda. But Democrats aren't even on the same page. As you point out, right, you've got the progressive wing of the party and the more moderate wing of the party not even close on some of these issues to being in agreement. So Democrats could push this through via the reconciliation process if they had all their members on board, and they don't right now. So for Democrats to pass this package, they've got to get their ducks in a row in their own caucus.
Donald Trump talks a lot about rhinos, Republicans in name only. Is Joe Manchin a dino, a Democrat in name only, or is he someone who lives in a state that is just more conservative than other Democrats?
I think there are certainly some Democrats who would point at Joe Manchin and call him a dino. And he has frustrated Democrats in the Senate and across the country, for that matter, for years. This isn't the first time that he has opposed policies and programs that other Democrats want. It's just coming to a head right now because he, as well as Kristen Sinema, right? We can't forget about her, but he is really the one on this issue that is standing in the way of moving that program.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Kristen Sinema from Arizona and the difference between her and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Is Manchin on this issue hard because coal is the dominant industry in West Virginia, or is it about the spending? And is Kristen Sinema primarily just on the spending, or does she have issues in Arizona that are specific to that part of the country as well?
I think Kristen Sinema has got other objections and problems that are that she's raising with this bigger package, and you can have that happen when so many things are packed into one piece of legislation. This I think would qualify as what Capitol Hill insiders would call an omnibus bill, where different standalone pieces of legislation are put together, and the number of objections, the number of possible objection points goes up when you've got so many different things in that bill. Manchin is squarely on the coal piece because of West Virginia's dominance in that industry. And he's got other objections as well, but this one really hits home for Joe Manchin.
Do you think anyone has read the entire 3,000 whatever pages it is of the bill, or are they just getting the reports from their staff?
I'm sure there's some staffer out there and maybe even a political junkie or two that have read the thing. But frankly, that doesn't matter right now because there's no deal in place. There's no agreement that would lead to a final legislative text, right? So, and that's something that your listeners, can watch for is if this continues to develop, and we get an agreement, watch just how fast legislative language is developed, and then when the vote happens, because there's often Congress is criticized, sometimes rightly so, criticized for moving very, very slowly. But that institution can move quickly when it wants to. And we often see that with big, high-profile, controversial pieces of legislation that are developed and then quickly voted on. And as you mentioned, it'll be thousands of pages long, and you got to wonder if anybody read it before they vote on it.
Right now, the Democrats look divided. It makes them look weaker as a party, in my opinion. If they get some version of this thing passed through, if they chop it up to the point where they can finally get the Democrats to agree to pass something, do they ultimately still get the win on this because they got some version of it through?
I think that depends who you ask, right? I think that generally speaking, yes. Delivering on the president's agenda, they'll be able to claim credit on that. However, there will be others who are likely not pleased with it because they didn't get every piece of it that they wanted. And that is where you'll have some disappointed folks, but, overall, they will point to it as a victory.
Republicans are united. They don't want this reconciliation bill. They say it's too expensive. We can't afford it. Do they lose any ground by not, pumping more money into the economy or into these issues that are in the reconciliation bill, or are they good?
I think some Republicans will point to their support of the smaller, more targeted infrastructure bill that has bipartisan support. And I think you'll hear Republicans, many of them say, hey, look, I'm willing to support that. We did this in a bipartisan manner, but this Build Back Better plan, the $3.5 trillion or whatever it ends up being, that was too much for me. I couldn't support that. We don't have the money. And in addition, they're opposed to many of the policy prescriptions that are in that bill.
And the midterms are getting closer every time we chat. Do you think that this issue is going to hold up in the elections?
Oh, I think this will be a huge issue in 2022. And we've seen examples of this in years past where Democrats or Republicans push through a major piece of legislation, and the other party makes them pay for it at the ballot box because sometimes there are certain districts or certain states where a House of Representatives member or a senator will vote for that bill, but it doesn't really square with how that state would go politically, and sometimes they lose those seats. So this is going to be an issue for sure. Democrats will tout it, Republicans will attack it, and then we'll just see how it shakes out at the ballot box.
All right, Dave Dulio, thanks for the conversation. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Kevin.